Glenn, as we're getting ready to enter into the holiday season, obviously it can be a very stressful time for a lot of people. What does somebody need to focus on in general to allow themselves to enjoy food this winter and holiday season without feeling guilt and feeling like they've gone completely off the cliff and maybe even lost all the progress they made in the first 11 months of the year?
Yeah. Well, Frank, as you know, my system is a rules-based system. So usually during the regular part of the year, people are trying to follow some simple rules like, like I don't have bread or I only have it on Saturdays or, I always have 16 ounces of a green smoothie in the morning when I wake up or something like that. And the thing that people often do in the holidays is they figure that all bets are off. They're just going to take a vacation from their rules and the discipline. And it's like if they had a food monster inside of them, they have it on a short leash most of the time, and then they just drop the leash on the holidays. And what I found after working with 2,000 clients and talking to all these people is that it works an awful lot better to give your monster a longer leash, but a very specific length leash, than to just let go. There are a couple of reasons for that. We can talk about the science behind it if you want to, but a typical Thanksgiving meal plan might be I'm going to have one main dish and one dessert of my choosing. No matter what my rules are the rest of the year, that's what I'm going to do. The only exception to that would be if you're someone who can't have sugar, flour, or alcohol because you're just too addicted, then, none is a lot easier than some. But most people can manage it. And so if you think of a very specific set of boundaries and you plan it out and write it down beforehand, then your brain is really a lot more able to deal with that than the all bets are off kind of thing, even though theoretically you wouldn't do quite as much damage if it's just once a year or twice a year. Um, what happens is it's the difference between who's in control. Are you in control or is your food monster in control? And when you're in control, you're making decisions based on your intellect about these important food choices. When the food monster is in control, you're allowing whim and emotion and impulse to take over. And it has an impact on other addictions also. When you maintain a kind of a disciplined life with food, even if it's a discipline with 5,000 calories or whatever the indulgence is going to be, if you maintain that disciplined life, then you're more likely to maintain a disciplined life across all the other disciplines you're trying to implement. Porn, gambling, whatever you're having to struggle with. And so I recommend, I usually ask people, what would you like to do on Thanksgiving? Think of yourself waking up the day after or in the Monday after. What would make you feel proud that you did over the course of the weekend? And most people will come up with something reasonable. Like they don't really want to feel horribly stuffed after Thanksgiving and wake up feeling 3 pounds heavier and have to fight for 2 weeks to get it off. But they do want to have some of the things that their family made, and they do want to try this or try that. Another plan might be I can have 2 bites of any meal that I want to, right? But just anything that has a very specific boundary tends to work a lot better than a free for all. And like Jim Rohn said, a life of discipline is better than a life of regret. And Peter McWilliams said you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. So just make a couple of decisions. It's so much easier. And there are scientific reasons why this works better too. But that's the practical tip that I would give for people on the holidays.
How do you assist people or maybe advise people to handle the social stigmatization that can come with some of this, right? Obviously, if people are consulting with you, if they're hiring you, if they're listening to the podcast, they see life through a growth-centric lens. They're trying to improve. They're trying to become a better version of themselves. That's a small percentage of the population. You and I both know that, right? Most people are going to hear that, oh, you have rules on how you're going to eat over the holidays. Come on, it's just one day out of the year. Just live a little bit, right? It's not going to hurt anybody. Just have the extra dessert. Just have, a couple drinks here. What is it really going to harm? So especially when you're around people that are family and people that are within your close circle, this can be hard to kind of manage psychologically, emotionally. So, what are some tips in terms of managing the social stigma that can come with this approach?
That's a 50-cent question for sure. May I have 3.5 minutes to answer that? Because I need to give you a little background of psychology of groups and social gatherings. Okay. Um, so the psychology of groups and social gatherings is very powerful. And it comes from a time when it was kind of dangerous to be alone. Um, we relied on the tribe for survival. And fairly often there was not all this variety of things to eat and all these things we can indulge in. There were probably periods of starvation. And then when the group caught something or had a harvest, there was one thing to eat. And if you didn't eat it, if you refused to eat it because, oh, well, I just feel like lobster tonight, I don't really want to have that. If you refuse to have it, then you might get sickly or die or put the tribe at risk because everybody's labor was probably required. So I think that on one level, there's a very primitive desire that says that the fabric of our society requires that we all eat what's available and that we break bread together. You think about two warring tribes coming together to have a meal. They're proving that they're not going to poison each other. They're proving that there's no danger. So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of social pressure to eat what you want to eat, what everybody else is eating. What above and beyond the guilt that other people feel if you're not eating like they're eating, right? Um, but then if you understand the mechanisms that tribes use to cohere together like that, and you look at group psychology a little bit, there are some practical techniques you can use. One in particular that I try to have all of my people have the variation. It's called the alternative love technique, and you'll see why that works in a minute. Um, there's a difference between what psychologists call a group and an aggregate. An aggregate is like a bunch of people in the elevator. You walk into the elevator, nobody looks at each other. People kind of automatically assume a spot equidistant from another, like how much distance can I get from everybody else? We sit and stare at the wall ahead. There's no interaction, right? That's an aggregate. There's no shared moral values for how we're going to live together. There's no code of conduct for how we interact. It's a very brief gathering with no real social bond. A group, on the other hand, is what you would find if the elevator got stuck and 3 hours later the repairman opened it. You would see people probably took off their jackets. Some of them were sitting on the floor, probably letting their arms touch. Maybe someone had a deck of cards. Maybe they developed a little song that they sing if someone has to go to the bathroom, to kind of discourage them from going in the elevator. Maybe there was a rule about how often they can press the call button. What do you do when someone starts to panic? And there are all these tribal things that they develop so they can function as a group together. You could you could crystallize the difference between these two by thinking about what would happen if, as you were getting off the elevator, you said, "Hey, how about next year we get together again, same spot, same time?" Right? If you said that to the people after they were stuck for 3 hours, that would make sense, and probably a bunch of the people might want to do that. They've been through an ordeal together. They formed a little tribe. If I just said when I got to the 12th floor, "It's been great. Let's get together here again," in exactly 1 year, people would look at me like I'm a nut, right? That's the difference between a group and an aggregate. Okay. So now your family is the ultimate group. Your family is the group that you rely upon the most. There's the most coherent, there's the most time and history spent in identifying codes of conduct and bringing it all together. But it still turns out that the quality of groupness is ephemeral. It starts to fade over time. So, for example, if I did get back together with those people in the elevator in a year, we wouldn't feel quite as bonded when we first saw each other. We might have to kind of re-engage in some traditions, like we might need to call back, the song that we sing to stop Kathy from going to the bathroom. Right? We might need to say, remember that card game that we played. There has to be some memory and bonding to bring that groupness together. This is true even of the family. Okay, so now you can look at social pressure to overeat in a different context. When I walk into Thanksgiving and my mom comes running up to me with a piece of chocolate pie and she says, "Here, it's your favorite. I made it just for you." Well, if I say, "Oh, mom, I'm not supposed to have chocolate. My triglycerides are high and, it's not really good for you." I've done a couple of things. First of all, I made her feel guilty about wanting to have chocolate. Secondly, what she was trying to do was reestablish the group norm. This is what we do on Thanksgiving. We eat chocolate pie together. This is the Livingston family. This is what we do. And so now I'm threatening in her mind, unconsciously. People don't think about this consciously, but at a very primitive level, I'm threatening the fabric of our family. I'm threatening the bond. And she's just trying to reestablish that groupness. So what you want to do instead is give her another way to love you. Like, this is the best way she knows how, is to focus on food, and most families do this. But you could say, "You know what, mom, I'm really cold. The air conditioning is up a little bit high and it was cold in the car. Do you happen to have a sweater I could borrow?" "Oh, honey, of course. Let me go get you Michael's sweater. You can wear it." It could even be a request for information. "I couldn't get a good internet connection in the car and I need to know the score of the game. Is Michael here? Does he know what's going on?" "Oh, honey, sure. Let me take you to his room." "Or can I have a cup of tea? My stomach's a little upset. Could I have a little mint tea?" "Absolutely, honey, I can do that." Give her another way to love you back into the tribe. And if you think about, this is what all that pressure is about. These people are trying to reestablish the tribe, and they're trying to love you. It's usually not a, pernicious, evil attempt to get you to break your diet and make you be a great big fat person the rest of your life. It's usually that they're just trying to love you. And go prepare. Think this through before you go in. What avenue can you give them to offer you that love gift, and then how grateful can you be so that they feel fine about it. And you'll find the whole conversation to sidestep. You don't really have to deal with the social pressure. So I hope that answers your question. That's the best technique we've come up with for managing that.
Yeah, no, very, very well. And I love the tactic there. It's similar. I've heard, like when you move into a new neighborhood, a great way to establish a relationship and connection with your neighbors is to go. And I doubt very few people do this in the modern world because we're not borrowing cups of sugar from our neighbors. But maybe this is more of a historical thing that people used to do in the past. But it's like you're the new person on the block. Like you go across the street and ask somebody to borrow a cup of sugar. Now you're somewhat kind of indebted into them, but you've established that reciprocity with that individual. It's kind of the same tactic that you shared there with maybe asking for the sweater or the internet connection. Exactly, exactly. And it's not that your mom's not gonna feel like your mom, but it's like now, like you said, you've given her a different way to love you, which is all she ultimately wants to do. Um, right? Yeah. Hopefully, hopefully the vast majority of them. Maybe there's a handful of them out there. Well, there's an interesting kind of pivot, right? Like family dynamics can be interesting and challenging sometimes during the holidays, right? Maybe it's the only time of the year. Maybe you feel like the black sheep. Maybe you have an individual within your family that does feel like a black sheep. Like sabotage from another family member, like could be an ultimate thing that maybe somebody out there is struggling with. So I know the tactic that you just shared will work in the vast majority of cases, but if there is actually a person that I don't want to say doesn't want the best for you, but right, sometimes it's like it's challenging subconsciously to the other person. Like, oh, well, you're living this way. You're challenging them to live a, at the standard they know they should be, but maybe they're struggling with alcoholism themselves. Maybe they know that they should be having rules, but they don't want to. So it's the crab in the bucket mentality, right? I'm going to pull you down. Is there another strategy, or is that just something like you kind of got to handle on a case by case basis?
It helps to plan ahead of time and think about what the worst thing someone might say to you would be. Um, and then ask yourself, well, what do you really owe this person? Do you really have to be nice in return if they're going to come at you kind of nasty? Can you deflect something with humor? Like for example, once I walked into a room and there were a whole bunch of people in the room that I knew and loved, and my dad was there. He's a little hostile to me. He's kind of competitive with me. He's not around anymore. And he looks at me and says, "Getting fat," in the middle of everybody with everything. And what I wish I would have said, which is what I say now if I run into those situations, which are very rare. First of all, because I'm not fat anymore, but I would say, "I see you've been practicing your social skills, Dad. Good for you." But you know, Can you think of something humorous to say? And you're going to have to plan it out beforehand. Usually, if you think about the worst thing that people could say, and you come up with a response beforehand, what they actually say is usually nothing even close to that. The second thing is to ask, could you ever imagine saying that to someone you love? Could you ever imagine saying that thing to someone you love? Uh, Usually the answer is no. What would you say instead? And then tell yourself that thing. Before you go in there, tell yourself that thing. That's going to insulate you from the psychological impact of the mean thing they're going to say. And that just becomes a matter of sticks and stones. Like it's not like it doesn't hurt. Of course, it's going to hurt if my dad notices I gained some weight or something. But I don't have to have a whole chocolate cake because my dad says that I'm fat. I don't have to do that. I can just look at it as his problem and, you know, maybe deflect it a little bit.
Yeah, most people's projections are a reflection of their own kind of inner dialogue and thoughts, right? So if they're looking for an area to poke you in, a lot of times that's where they're maybe struggling the most internally is as well. And yeah, maybe some humor, layered with kind of some soft loviness is the best way to kind of handle that. I want to go back to
What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. It's good practice to face these situations. If you cower from them, if you avoid social situations because you're frightened that someone's going to criticize you, that has an impact on the rest of your life. But if you walk in and it feels kind of icky for a little while, but you see that you survived it and you make some contact with other people, or maybe you did deflect it with humor and it went pretty well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's a good opportunity to get stronger and be better able to face the world. So there's that too. Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
no, we're good. We're like everybody's big brother here, kind of counseling in on some family dynamics. But this is all great stuff. I want to go back to the rules because you mentioned at the beginning, you operate and teach a rule based framework, and I know specific rules are going to be case by case based upon people's past, the struggles that they've had, their existing or past relationships with food. But what are some general rules that somebody should live and operate from 365 out of the year, but then also like how do those rules change as you're getting into the holidays?
Well, okay. One of the principles I've discovered is I call it diet agnosticism. I find that as long as people are not trying to starve themselves and they're not trying to live entirely on potato chips and donuts, that there are a million different ways to stop overeating. And most people, by the time they reach the age of 18 or so, have read so many diet books, and or at least my clients tend to be more in their 50s and 60s. But most people have so much nutritional knowledge, and their struggle is complying with it. And so I find that it's a lot easier to start with one simple rule, which doesn't necessarily put you on the perfect diet. It's not perfectly nutritional. It's not going to make you lose a lot of weight really quickly. What it will do is help you to develop a sense of discipline, help you develop a sense that you can actually beat this thing. So maybe it's something like I always take 3 deep breaths before I eat anything. Or I put my fork down between bites. Maybe it's just a rule that supports something mindful. Maybe it's I always put my gym clothes out before I go to bed at night. Or I never go to sleep without writing down a hypothetical food plan for the next day. Notice I said hypothetical because it's hard to follow what you write down 100%. But if you force yourself to go through the exercise of writing down what you might like to eat tomorrow, it's going to make you scan your day. You're going to think, where am I going to get the food? When am I going to have time to eat it? It looks like I don't even have time to breathe. Should I eat a little bit more before I go? What am I going to have when I get home? Maybe I'll have it all ready for me in Tupperware before I go. Um, I find that setting a low bar to start with works much better than trying to aggressively comply with a whole diet, because eventually that triggers what we call the identity function. So I knew this truck driver, for example, and he had 150 pounds to lose. And he said, you know what? I am not going to stop eating fast food. I have to stop at these truck stops 3 times a day. But I'll tell you what, I won't go back for seconds. And that's all he did. He said, I'm never going to go back for seconds. And don't you know, after a couple of weeks, he sees himself still eating fast food, like not eating a picture of health, but he's not going back for seconds. He loses a little bit of weight, and his brain starts to say, maybe I can be successful at this. Maybe I'm someone who cares about my health. I wonder what else someone who cares about their health would do. And then they add on another simple rule, right? Like I think his was something about only having 2 slices of bread or something like that because he was overdoing it with bread. But he went on to lose the weight. And, I've seen thousands of people go on to lose the weight when they do something like this. So I can't give you one rule that you should have. I did write a book called 101 Food Rules that lists all the different kinds of rules that people use successfully. But I find that most people know. Like what is one thing that you could and would do that would make a difference in your health, but it's really not onerous. It's not a difficult thing to do. Just to kind of prove for yourself that you have this down. And then you build that up over time. Usually the rules have something to do with minimizing or eliminating processed food. I find that people can eat healthy and be healthy on a wide variety of different diets. But the more processed food that they have, the harder it is for them. Like there are chemicals in our food supply that interfere with your ability to know when you're full and hungry. So we're all walking around trying to be like, mindful hippies. I call them like, I'm just going to be aware of when I'm hungry and full and I'm just going to learn to stop. But how can you do that if there are $50 million that, some big company paying all these rocket scientists to stop you from knowing when you're hungry or full? So I find that less processed food is better, more whole foods is better. I wound up on a whole foods plant-based diet. I tend to do a lot better with that. But I know people that work, they're eating mostly meat and vegetables and a couple of berries, and that works well for them also. Um, so I will say that there is a food monster strategy I call the confuse and conquer strategy, where it's always getting you to jump from diet to diet in search of the perfect one. And I would say pick one and stick with it. It's better to find a diet that's 80% perfect for you, but stick with it 100%, than to keep searching for the one that's 100% perfect for you. Because the grass isn't greener on the other side. The grass is greener where it's watered. So, and then when you come to the holidays, usually people want to add a little bit of processed food back, or people are usually trying to cut down on flour and sugar and alcohol. And around the holidays, people want to have some type of conditions that allow them to have, dessert or their Aunt Rachel's shepherd's pie or whatever, doesn't match with the normal rules. And 2 out of 3 people I find are able to do that. And so if you're pretty sure that you can visualize yourself having a limited amount, then just decide what that amount is going to be, write it down, review it before you go in for the holiday, and then stick to it, and you'll be really happy that you did.
I love that approach there, with I think called diet agnosticism, right? I think the best diet, the best workout plan, the best business building strategy, the best insert almost anything you're trying to do is going to be the plan that you can stick to. Some people that'll be ketogenic, other it's going to be plant-based, other people is going to be moderate to high carb. It's like the one that you can follow at that 80% mark is going to be the one that's going to be success. Exactly. A lot of people are looking for the one magic. What's the best diet for that? I mean, it's very trendy, and we've utilized some of those keywords for search stuff. I definitely want to get into the science of maybe identity change and how language and all the things, because you're very specific in a lot of the ways that you speak, and that's what I've always really enjoyed. But I want to ask you a specific question, because you talked about the 3 breaths. That I think it's a rule that you practice before eating. How much of that is to maybe create space just internally, maybe from a mindfulness practice, versus how much of it is actually like shifting the nervous system into a parasympathetic state? Because I think I've always heard, right, like you don't want to be eating and consuming a lot when you're in a stressful state.
That's a very well articulated question. And I think it's mostly the latter in my experience. Um, I'll tell you why. I think 100,000 years ago, food was scarce. And so I think those of us who survived, our ancestors who survived, developed the ability to automate the acquisition of food. what the availability of food seemed like an urgent opportunity. And so I think that our reptilian brains learn to push our rational brains out of the way at those times and, you know, go get the bananas or go get the meat or go get what was ever available because you didn't know the next time it was going to be available. And as a consequence, I think we live with brains that really want to automate the acquisition of calories. And breathing is your de-automation intervention. I think that we live in a very sick society where we've all tacitly agreed to slowly kill ourselves with food and porn and gambling and drug addiction and everything else, but especially with food, it's socially acceptable to kill yourself with food. Um, and I think that the big food companies have really taken advantage of our tendency to automate this food behavior. And so the best intervention I can recommend for people is that you start to introduce something that's unnatural because it feels annoying at first. Wait, you mean there's this big hot plate, steaming plate of food in front of me, and Glenn wants me to pause? You know, screw Glenn, I'm just going to eat my food, right? Um, and so you think of it like a muscle. And if you can't take 3 deep breaths, then you just start out. But every time before you eat, you go 1, 2, 3. Go 1, 2, 3. That's enough to shift your nervous system a little bit and stop that automatic cycle and stop digging those neurological grooves that are going to show you how to get calories quickly again in the future. The other thing that happens when you do that, when you can create that space, and it is a mindful space, but it's not mindfulness for the sake of mindfulness. It's really mindfulness to give you better choices. Um, when that space gets a little longer, when your pause muscle gets stronger, you can start to do other things with it. You can take deep breaths, but you could also call what I refer to as a refutation in there. So um, let's say your food monster is accustomed to making excuses for you during that automation process. Oh, well, what the hell? We can start our silly diet again tomorrow. You know, let's just have the chocolate today. Well, what happens when you have those thoughts and then you eat the chocolate automatically is that you dig the groove a little bit deeper and you're more likely to have a chocolate craving tomorrow. And you're more likely to think, I'll just start again tomorrow. So if you have a larger pause space and you're accustomed to pausing, you can say, wait a minute, the only time I can eat healthy is now. I have to always use the present moment to be healthy. If I'm in a hole, I got to stop digging. So you can actually insert some thinking into that pausing space, which invalidates the irrational justifications that your food monster is accustomed to using to make it more comfortable for you to eat the things that break your rules that you know you really shouldn't be doing. So yeah, the pausing to calm down the reptilian brain, put yourself in a parasympathetic state is really helpful. The breathing out for longer than you breathe in, calmly breathing in and then breathing out for longer, that is very good at taking you from the sympathetic emergency response to the parasympathetic state. Because if you were being chased by a hungry tiger, you'd be going, right? But if you have time to rest and digest and think and strategize and use your rational brain, you wouldn't be breathing like that. You'd be breathing slowly and clearly and probably breathing out longer than you breathe in. So, okay, I think that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is something you get into with the clients and people that you work with. I'm assuming maybe it comes up conversationally sometimes, or maybe in sessions it does. But do you recommend advise device free meals, maybe for families? Right, sit down together, have a meal collectively without phones, without TVs on. Because I think it feeds into this discussion of like this calming place. Like if everybody's locked into a device here, or we're watching something on TV, we're more engaged in that than, enjoying the food that's sitting in front of us. Like, how does maybe device free or TV free mealtime play into this?
Well, I don't insist on it because it's hard to get people to cooperate with that sometimes. But our devices are designed to seduce us into reptilian brain dopamine hits. And that's the whole purpose. The entire algorithm in social media, they make money when we take quick hits. And so it makes it harder to be in that parasympathetic state when you have the devices in front of you. And, it's just common sense. We don't relate when we're staring at the screens. Um, so, when my girlfriend and I are having dinner, we're usually just having dinner. We're not staring at a device together. We don't usually eat in front of the TV. And so I do recommend that. I think it's good old fashioned human contact, but I'm kind of a dinosaur. So yeah.
No, it's great. And it is something we will recommend. Our clients are struggling a lot of times with technology screen based addictions here. Um, Identity, you've used a lot of the language around this food monster, like winning that battle. I think it's injecting confidence and belief in yourself to conquer this. To me, this sounds a lot like building of a new identity, not feeling victim, maybe not calling yourself a food addict. I think that is a conversation you have I had previously, and I think that is so aligned in what we teach our men that are struggling with porn is you are a conqueror. Like, I don't want you calling yourself a porn addict every single day. The rebuilt man is about becoming the man that can win those battles against everything that the world is throwing at them. So how do you view this through the lens of identity change, identity transformation, and based on your background and expertise in psychology, what is some of the science showing with some of these rules and frameworks that you've been discussing? How does the science back and support that up?
Well, I have not seen evidence that addiction is a disease. People will cite this study where there's a particular area of the brain that lights up more when alcoholics see alcohol or, porn addicts see porn. And but I think that's just a function of learning. Taxi drivers light up that portion of the brain when they see taxis. Should we say that they're powerless over taxis, that they have a taxi driving addiction? I think it's just reflective of human learning. So I don't believe unless and until someone really shows me the science that it's a disease, I don't really believe in this idea of disease or powerlessness. And I've got some thought experiments I can take people through that kind of prove to them that they are not powerless to do anything about what they're doing in it. That's the first thing that I have to beat with people, is to convince them that this is a winnable battle. Um, okay. In terms of identity, I think of it in a unique way. Um, it's not really an abstract concept like the early psychoanalysts might have talked about. I think of it as proceeding from what you habitually do at the moment of temptation. Character is what you habitually do at the moment of temptation, right? You can give in, you could follow your rule, you could have courage, um, and values are reflected by the rules that you choose. If I say that I only have chocolate on the weekends and I have 3 nutritious meals every calendar day, and I wake up each day to drink, 2 8-ounce glasses of green smoothies, then I obviously value my health and fitness, right? My identity is the sum total of my values. So it all kind of ladders up from the values that I choose and the rules that I follow. And if I see myself having the green smoothies and having 3 nutritious meals a day and following the other rules that I set for myself, when I see myself doing that day in and day out, you get to the point where you don't even really need the rule. And people know this intuitively. So when I ask people, hey, do you think you could never have chocolate again? They go, no way, no way, I couldn't do that. If I say, do you think you could become a person who doesn't eat chocolate? They go, yeah, I might be able to do that. Like we kind of know that we have those shortcuts in our head, and that's what I call identity. Identity change is difficult because the brain thinks that you might be giving up something that kept you alive. So your brain thinks that it's keeping you alive by indulging in porn. Your brain thinks it's keeping you alive by binge eating. Um, I actually tell people binge eating is not a disease, it's an indication of a healthier than normal brain. It was the people with the strongest cravings who survived 100,000 years ago because they were most motivated to go and find food. Unfortunately, we just live in a really sick environment. Um, Pornography didn't exist 100,000 years ago. Like you were lucky if you got a peek of a woman at the or a man at the river. Um, and so I think it's important to recognize that we have strong brains. The very same mechanism that creates those addictive patterns, very same mechanism that builds cravings, also can label them as dormant. So it can also extinguish a craving. So it's impossible for you to be broken unless you have some type of brain damage, or you have a lesion to your ventral medial hypothalamus or something like that. It's very, very unlikely that if you were able to form a strong craving, that you can't break that craving because it's the same exact mechanism that's operating. Um, and so, this is kind of the advanced part of my program, and not a lot of people get to it. But once they understand the machinery of building rules and following them and sticking to them, I start to ask them, well, what values do you want to reflect in your rules? And what does that say about the identity you're trying to develop? And they kind of keep their eye on that and they revise that over time. And eventually they don't even really need the rules. Eventually they just become that. They've just built that character. So that's how I think about that.
Do you use or do you believe in the use of visualization? Meaning, you ask that person the question, can you see yourself being a person that no longer eats chocolate? And if they say yes, like you're helping them, from what I think, like envision themselves down the road becoming a different person. Like, is there a strategy in your approach to using that? And if so, like, how do you walk somebody through, maybe in a session or through a process of visualization?
Yeah. Um, we have a process we call the big why, which doesn't sound incredibly creative or unique, but it captures what we're doing. And this builds motivation. It builds a motivational fantasy that's specific to the rules that you're trying to follow. It differs from general weight loss motivation in that it's tied to the specific rules that you've chosen, so it becomes a unique fantasy. And I do ask people to visualize. The way I'll phrase it is, hey, I know that your food monster says this is not possible, but what if you could comply with this rule for an entire year? What would be different in your life? I want you to take me through a day, not just, well, you would have lost some weight, but what would be different about how you felt when you got up? Would your joints ache less? You have fewer health risks? Would you have more energy? Would you have a better relationship with your wife, with your kids, would you be doing more work? Would you be more successful? Let's look at every different area of your life and build a very detailed fantasy about what's waiting for you. This turns out to be incredibly effective for two reasons. First of all, we seem to have a kind of goal-seeking mechanism inside of us, and if you know what you're aiming at, if you know where you're going, you're much more likely to get there than if you're just saying, "Well, I'm going to eat good." You're much more. I think Yogi Berra says, if you don't know what you're aiming for, you're probably going to hit something else. Um, and the second reason is that our food monsters don't want us to see what we're giving up. Like, can you be free of worries about diabetes or cancer? Can you be able to go out hiking with your grandkids? Can you be a better role model for your adolescent daughter? Um, and when people don't take the time to very specifically detail what the future has in store for them, if they just comply with this, and they don't know what they're giving up, and it's like, oh, well, am I gonna eat this cookie and be a worse role model for my kid? I don't think I want to do that. So that helps. The other thing that helps is, we call it the big why not. Is thinking about what's going to happen usually in 5 or 10 years if you keep indulging. And most people think that they're treading water and that, if they could start again tomorrow or next week or next year, and they're going to be in the same spot. But when they stop and think about it, they're not really treading water, they're drowning. And asking people, what does the ghost of Christmas future have to show you? Although it's very unpleasant, it often scares them straight. So the combination of those two visualizations can be really powerful.
It's exactly the approach that we teach. We want to envision and desire a future greater than the one that we currently have. So we're running towards that one thing, right? Napoleon Hill states, the starting point of all success is desire, right? So how crystal clear can we get on this ultimate future outcome that pulls us towards there? But then there's also that kind of future hell that we run from. So they tap into the fear-based motivation. I'm running from this one and I'm running towards this. And some people will be heavier pulled with the future. Others will maybe be more resistant from the fear mechanism, but we're both driven through both of those mechanisms. So
carrots and sticks, carrots and sticks. Yeah, and have a very brave look at both.
Yeah. Well, this kind of transitions into, I think, the next thing for most people after the holidays is New Year's resolutions, goal setting. A lot of people feel defeated going into the new year, even setting some of these things right. The data, backs it up that most New Year's quote unquote resolutions are failures, right? I think, 91% of them are complete failure by the beginning of February. So anchoring into this discussion conversation we've been having around the holidays, with a lot of people having success here, what do people need to be thinking about, and how early setting, whether they call them resolutions or goals, and then what's a framework that somebody can kind of take away using these same rules and frameworks that we've been discussing here?
Well, part of it is being very specific of what you want to accomplish, what rule you're going to follow, what is the resolution, and then setting the bar, knowing it's easier to build small habits than big ones. So just like we talked about before, starting with small resolutions that you do every day that are going to, create a foundation you can build on. So that's important also. Also, people are very frightened of the language of perfection when they're describing a goal. People are told in our culture that perfectionism is always a bad thing, but it's not really true. I think people should commit with perfection and forgive themselves with dignity, just like an Olympic archer might do when they're aiming at the bullseye. That bullseye is very well defined. You know whether the arrow hit it or missed it. And if it does miss, you know by how much and in what direction. So when the Olympic archer is aiming at the bullseye, they can actually see the arrow going into the bullseye before they let go of it. They purge their mind of doubt and insecurity and they aim with perfection. But if they miss the mark, they don't say, oh my God, I'm a pathetic archer. I might as well shoot everything else up in the air. They make an assessment, make some adjustments, turn guilt into responsibility, and then they get right back on track. So if you can not go along with the culture's fear of having a perfectionistic goal, then you're more likely to accomplish it. People, they wind up kind of fuzzying up the bullseye because they're afraid of committing to something with their heart and soul, and because they're afraid that when they miss it, they're going to feel too guilty. So if they can embrace this commit with perfection but forgive yourself with dignity ethos, they're going to do a lot better. One way to do that is to recognize that you're really only presenting the bullseye to your food monster as if it were set in stone. It's like what I said to my little niece when she was 2 years old. I said, Sarah, you can't cross the street without holding my hand. Never, ever, 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 ever. But I knew that I was going to revise that when she got a little older. But I didn't want to have this conversation about when you're a big girl, maybe we'll make this different, because it was too dangerous. I didn't want her impulsively darting into the street. I didn't even want the image in her head. And it's kind of like that with your food monster. You have to present these very hard and fast rules, but with forethought and consideration and experience, you can always change them over time. So don't fear the hard and fast rules. Be very clear about what you're committing to. Commit with perfection. Forgive yourself with dignity. Um, it's better, like we talked about before, to, if you want to go through the holidays with some indulgence, set the parameters of that indulgence, because you're going to be exercising your muscle, your compliance muscle, throughout the holidays, even if it's much easier to comply because the leash is a lot longer. And that way, when New Year's comes and you're ready to go, your your compliance muscle is going to be a lot stronger. What and also, you won't have dug too big a hole for yourself. Often saying, "Well, I'm going to start again on January 1st" is just an excuse to binge as much as you can before then. So, set your rules early, set up your compliance for the holidays, give yourself some boundaries. They don't have to be too hard, and then hit the ground running when January 1st comes on, and you're better off than 90% of the people out there. So, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. Last few here, and we'll wrap it up and point people to your book and your program. I'm curious, with this rules based approach and the frameworks that you teach and use with your client, how does it address in any way people's emotional attachment or trauma based relationships that they could perhaps have with food? Right? Maybe they grew up in a very heavy toxic environment and they found comfort as a young kid, escaping and finding comfort through food when emotional chaos was taking place in the home. Or maybe they were rewarded for accomplishments as a youth with desirable and pleasurable treats. So they develop this emotional attachment that when things go well, they either get rewarded with food, or when things are going hectic, they find peace and comfort in food. Is there a way that the rules-based approach addresses the emotional or trauma-based attachment that people can have with foods?
First of all, I spent 40 years trying to do that myself because I thought that I could love myself thin. And if I could fill the hole in my heart, then I wouldn't keep trying to fill the hole in my stomach. And I went to all the best therapists, and I cried and I screamed and I did Overeaters Anonymous, and I, found a higher power, and I did it all. I did it all. And I learned so much about myself, and I had so much more compassion for myself as a result. But I got fatter and fatter and fatter. Um, and so I said, something's wrong here. There's something wrong with this approach. Um, the way that I think about it is, um, look, man, if you need a hug, I've got a hug for you. I'm a really nice guy. If you need a hug, I got a hug for you. Um, it's the match that lit the fire. Um, it started the habit. My mother's father had just gone to jail when I was born, and she was very depressed. And my dad was going to have to go to Vietnam, and she was very terrified. And she didn't really have what it took to mother me. She put a bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup in a refrigerator on the floor. And when I went to her for hugs and love, she said, "Go get your Bosco." And so I learned that chocolate was love. I learned that. And I spent 40 years trying to cry it out and figure it out. Um, what I find is that there are so many things on a practical behavioral basis that reinforce the habit, that just knowing that this is what started it and having a catharsis about it, talking about it in therapy, recognizing my mother was overwhelmed, having talks with her about it. Um, Although it's very valuable and very interesting, it doesn't really fix the behavior. You think about it like a fire, like this started the fire. What I found is build a really good fireplace around that fire so the ashes can't escape and burn down the house. Once you have it well contained, then it's a lot easier to look at in therapy. So I just think the priorities are wrong in our culture. I think that we should fix the habit first, and then you can address all the emotional issues. I think most of our culture says, let's fix all the emotional issues, and you're not going to get better until you do. And I don't think that's true. I mean, I still have pain about what I went through as a kid, pain and trauma. Um, the last thing is that most people don't understand that it's a two-way relationship. So your brain is always monitoring to see what conditions lead to the acquisition of calories. And so if you get depressed or lonely and then you have chocolate, um, your brain learns that a good way to get chocolate is to get you good and depressed and lonely. And so you wind up actually reinforcing the emotions you're trying to escape from by doing that. And so if you don't fix the behavior, it almost doesn't matter how much insight you have, the problem is just going to keep getting worse. So I think it should be behavior and then emotions. And I think most of the world goes emotions and then behavior. So it's not that I think that it's not related or that I don't have compassion for it, but I think that people are off base about how they're approaching it, and that's why people go around in circles. It took me a long time to figure that out.
I saw a clip one time. I think it might have been a shorter length YouTube video, but it was from the late 90s, early 2000s. And they were standing in New York City outside of like a counseling therapist office. And it was a street interview of multiple therapists. And they'd ask them where they went to school, their credentials, PhD in this. They're listing off all these letters after their name. And the last question was, how many people have you healed with your therapeutic work? And every single therapist that they asked pondered it for a minute, and you see their brain spinning, and they couldn't come up with like anybody that they had actually like healed the problem. It's like, okay, well, there's something broken about this approach. I think we could spend the rest of our lives unpacking all the trauma and how we were upset and maybe hurt and bullied and this and that, and dad yelled at me this way and that. You know, social media has only made this more acceptable, right? Because you can go online and you can, play the victim in any type of situation, and people will like and heart it's going to be okay. I've seen the same thing in all of our work. It's every guys will come to us. They've been spending 20 years trying to solve the trauma from their childhood as to the reason why they watch porn. No, you've created a habitual neurological based behavior pattern that when you feel this way, you do this. And when you try to just heal that, like you said, you're reinforcing it, and your brain and mind will come up with all these different patterns to take you back to that place. So change the behavior, change the identity, and through that process, there will be some healing. But sometimes like the hurt that you had as a kid is actually shaped you into who you are today. We'll celebrate it with great athletes, right? Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team, and it lit a fire in him that set him down this path of becoming one of the greatest athletes of all time. We'll celebrate it in that way, but it's like we can't recognize that in our own self. So I love the response. And I think
I had a sponsor in OA who said, Glenn, if you want to know why you're overeating, stop overeating. You'll find out why.
defeat your cravings. Tell us about the book, the program, and where guys can get connected if they're interested in going deeper with you.
So let me just say it's a comprehensive book about everything I've learned in 10 years working with 2,000 overeaters, 2,000 people on my paid coaching programs, over 2 million readers between the books and Psychology Today. And you can get the book for free at defeatyourcravings.com in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. The other formats cost a little bit. Just click the big blue button, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's available for free also. It's at defeatyourcravings.com. Click the big blue button.
Incredible. Guys, we'll have all of that plugged down there in the show notes below. We'll have the previous episodes and conversation we've had with Glenn in the past there as well. Brother, I appreciate you jumping on here today. Hopefully we gave people a lot of tools and strategies and frameworks going into the holidays. Guys, we want you to win this battle. We want you to go through the holidays, having the best time of your life, and come out on the other side a better version and set yourself up for incredible success in 2026. So make sure to give Glenn a follow, rate, review, share all this stuff. Check out his book for free. But Glenn, my brother, I appreciate you, man. We'll talk soon.